Okay, now we can.
There
now
we
we can
were,
start.
or there I was. Let's see the fire story. So I was like, I guess I was 19. 19, and yeah, first summer that I was back home after my freshman year. And the deal was that even if you had, in those days, even if you had a more or less full scholarship, it wasn't 100%. The idea was you were supposed to contribute something. So I had gone back to Alaska, where the family lived, my parents and so on, to work somewhere and make some money over the summer, whatever it was supposed, $500. It doesn't seem like much now, it was a lot then. And I think I had just got home and flying on the airplane, 15 hours, whatever it was. And I had just got home and I was in bed, and it was like early in the morning when suddenly my brother burst in. Steve, get up, we gotta go. What? There's a forest fire. They're paying $17.50 an hour. This was huge.
What year was this? 47 plus 19, so 66? No, 56. No, 66. Yeah, 66.
I guess.
That is a lot of money.
Early summer.
That's a lot.
So, okay, good, whatever. So I got up and, I don't know, pulled some clothes or whatever together and got in the car and off we went. Now, in order to go from Anchorage to, this fire was west and down on the Kenai Peninsula, if I remember my geography rightly. So we had to drive up the Cook Inlet and then back down again on these gravel roads. So like, I don't know, 300 miles, whatever, to get there. But what had happened was this all able men back in those days, quick, we got this humongous forest fire. It's going to explode one of the gas fields. So there were these gas thingies all over the place, and oil wells all over the place. It was a national forest, if I remember correctly. The whole thing was on fire. However they all got started, I don't know. Anyway, so they put out this bulletin. The governor had gotten on and said, "We need everybody. We're going to pay you this much money. Just come.
All hands on deck.
Everybody, all hands on deck. Anybody we can get, just show up." And they gave us a map where to show up. And my brother, living there, he knew these roads. He hunted and fished and so on. So he knew where we were going. I had no idea where we were going. So we set out, and by the time, it must have been more than that, maybe 400 miles. By the time we got close, it was nightfall that evening, and the whole place was on fire. So we're driving through the forest fire. And there's no wind to speak of, because otherwise, I don't know that we would have made it, but there was no traffic either. There were a few cars, other guys like us coming to the rescue. It was all very exciting.
Now, had you ever fought a fire before?
No.
So it was literally just, we need able-bodied people.
We need guys who are woods knowledgeable, which most of those guys
in Alaska, yeah.
You've been out hunting and so on. You know how to handle yourself in the woods. You're not going to end up dead because you fall in a creek and drown or something.
Did they let women do this, or was that?
Hell no. This was them.
Yeah, no.
I know that's horribly sexist, but that's the way it was in those days, in that time, in that place. So anyway, we got there in the middle of the night and to the rendezvous point, and there was a forest ranger, and there was a National Guard guy with a helicopter, and there was me and Craig, I don't know, 4 or 5 or other guys like us, and then there were all these indigenous guys, about 30 of them. And we were the crew then that had assembled at that point, and the National Guard guy swore us in or something. We had to, I will do blah, blah, blah. I don't even know what it was about.
Swore you in?
What we were doing,
Weird,
some kind of thing. We had to be sworn into the Forest Service or something temporarily. And
you sign over your life for that.
And he left. No, he left, and we were there with this forest ranger who was probably 30 max. The rest of us were 17, 18, 19, 20. I think probably the oldest among us was, except for the forest ranger, was 25. Anyway, he was in charge. Forest Ranger Bob, we'll call him. And so they had already, by the time Craig and I got there that evening, they had already set up a big old-fashioned Army surplus canvas tent thing on a wooden structure. The indigenous guys had done that like in 15 minutes. They knew what they were doing. I'm exaggerating. And so we could get under there with our sleeping bags. I had a sleeping bag, Army surplus sleeping bag, chicken feathers filled, lumpy, heavy, but it would keep you warm as long as it didn't get too cold. And so there we were. And the next morning we got up and there was the fire way the hell over there, like long way away. You could see the smoke and so on. And the forest ranger called us together. He said, okay, there's the fire. The wind is whatever, it's blowing that way. It's not coming our direction. So we have nothing to do until the wind changes. If it should, we may just sit here the whole time and do nothing. Who knows? Your job is to come whenever I call. So you got to stay where I can call you. But otherwise, you can do what you want. So here were these indigenous guys. Young guys. Young American Indian, if I can say it that way, men. And they knew what they were doing. So they proceeded to get supper, which was ptarmigan.
Well, what were y'all eating? Just
Can't quite hear.
What were y'all eating? Just like sea rations
sea
or something?
rations.
Tasty.
Sea
Okay.
rations.
So and they were out getting ptarmigan.
This cardboard box, you open it up and there's a can. And this is all old stuff. There was there was a little thing that went around it, kind of like those orange juice cans now that you pull.
Yeah.
But you had to there was a key glued to the top, and you popped it open and there was your bread. It had been in that can since 1942. I'm not exaggerating.
I know.
I mean, they'd have a date on it, 1942.
It's like older than you are.
Yeah, exactly. It was still good. It had been sealed.
Sure it
I mean,
was.
it didn't taste very good, but it wouldn't hurt you none. And then there'd be a can of some kind of mystery meat, and, this, that, and the other. And so there they were, and I watched them going out, and I watched these guys. You'd pick up a stick and throw the stick like a boomerang through the air when the ptarmigan, it's like a prairie chicken thing, about the size of 2 pigeons put together, kind of looks like a chicken a little bit, I guess they're related, and knocked that darn thing right out of the air, and I thought, Lord, I mean, these guys are skilled, really skilled. Or another guy made himself a slingshot. Where did you get the rubber from? I think from an old inner tube, because the tires still had tubes in them in those days. And I watched him do this. He made this completely with the stuff that was at hand. And I watched him shooting ptarmigan right out of the air. Wham! I mean, I knew how to shoot with a shotgun and knock a duck down and so on, but that's like this, and the duck flies into it, and bam. But this is a rock this big. These guys were skilled, and I was absolutely captured. So I just started watching it. And this is the kind of stuff you want to know how to do. And I full well realized I was not going to get any good at it just watching them, but I just wanted to see what they were doing, so I was watching. Now, meanwhile, down below where we were, there was a creek running through the...
So when you mean you were watching them, like, were they just doing this
hunting. They were hunting.
So you would go...
Well, they didn't much want you to... I can't remember how I knew this, but I was watching from a distance.
Okay. And everybody else, all the other white dudes from Anchorage were like sitting around drinking beer? Or...
No offense to anybody. My brother included. But I was really fascinated by their wood skills were just way beyond anything I'd ever seen. It was pretty good for what I came from. These guys were 1,000% better. They knew a lot. And I was impressed with their knowledge, and I just wanted to see what they were doing, and maybe I could learn something, etc. Anyway, long story short, we're eventually going to get to the forest fire part, by the way. But anyway, long story short, the fire's way the hell over there. seems to be going away. I mean, you can just barely see, and every now and then you can hear sort of a boom. Because what happens is when those fires get going and they hit those trees that are full of sap, and the tree literally boils and explodes, and the parts of the tree that are on fire are flung, and you could see it. They like they were like artillery shells,
Like rockets or something.
yeah. So, but they were all going that way, so there we were, without having to worry about that part, and or at least for the moment. And so I realized after a while that there's no way in the world I was going to be that skilled, and they didn't really want you around a whole lot. I could tell they really didn't. So I thought, well, hell, sea rations. And down below us, we were up on this little knoll. Down below us, there was a little creek, and it was about probably, I don't know, probably, probably from here to about here wide, and it was running through the permafrost and the tundra on top, so it sort of eroded down. So the water was probably 4 or 5 feet below the edge, and it was very clear. I mean, just boom, like straight cut. So there, I thought, and I could see the trout down in there, and I thought, and I didn't have any fishing gear with me. I mean, we had left in a hurry. But one of the white guys, had a lighter, like a Zippo. I've got a Zippo someplace, whatever I did with it. Anyway, he had a Zippo lighter, and it was a fisherman Zippo lighter, so it was made out different from the usual Zippos that are made out of steel. It was made out of clear plastic, and inside of that was a fish hook with a little feather on it. It was a little decorative, but it was a real fish hook. And so I'm looking at these fish, and I'm, you got a fish hook in there. And no, I was going to break my leg. Well, yeah, to get the fish hook. No. So there's got to be some way. We had these mosquito nets. Now, at this point, I don't remember when, but this was early in the year. Wherever we were, there weren't any mosquitoes. Thankfully.
Yeah, thankfully,
really
because they're like the size of birds in
they
Alaska.
carry you off and so on. So that the big ones won't get you. So we had these mosquito nets, and we had the cans of uneatable sea ration bread. So the mind of McFadgen Ketchum goes to work, except it was Ketchum, not McFadgen Ketchum. And I thought, if I could rig a net somehow, because I figured the water would go through the net, and maybe I could trap, net some of these trout. They were, they weren't huge, but they were big enough for eating purposes. Except, well, how am I going to do that? Because this thing was it was too wide to jump across.
The creek, yeah.
Yeah. And then I started looking around, and there were some spruce growing right on the edge. And there was a spruce where the roots had eroded just enough to where if you leaned on it, and it, nice, slick as snot, as they used to say, perpendicular across the creek, just right, and I could walk across carefully without falling in.
Little dirty dancing moment there.
So then I took some of the ropes we had for the tents and so on that were made out of this, it was green parachute cord.
Paracord, yeah.
Nylon kind of stuff. Anyway, so then I attached the 4 corners of it, or 6 corners, whatever it was, of this mosquito net, or mosquito thingy, and I was able to tie one end at one end. It was just about the right width, as it turned out, and drop it down in there with some rocks to weight it. And it just ballooned out perfectly. The current was nice, it was just right. And there were the trout swimming in and swimming out. They'd swim in, look around, what's this? And swim back out again. And just about the time I could pull it up, they would swim out.
Ugh.
This went on for a while. And then, of course, this bread. So I took the little chunks of bread and wadded them up because I knew you could, if you wadded them up enough, you could attach them to a fish hook and they would stick. And you used to catch catfish in Louisiana that way. And so I started just tossing them until just 2 or 3 of them drifted just right into the net. And the trout went, ooh, swim, 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 nibble, 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 not swim back out again, nibble, 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 and very gently and cautiously. And I trapped trout. And we ate trout. On the fire, hung on to this is a little bit, I don't know, uncomfortable. But anyway, you kill them first. They're not, you don't torture them at all. But anyway, you hang them on these sticks and you bake them basically because you didn't have anything to cook with. Anyway, one of the indigenous guys, after a while, I saw he was standing watching me. I thought, okay, well, whatever. And he walked over after a minute. He went, you come and watch with us, but not too close. Just you. Don't talk. Okay. So then I followed them. And they let me be within 15 or 20 feet, and they would they would pantomime. They didn't talk what to do. So I could see close up the knocking the ptarmigan right out of the air with the stick. Like I'm 15 feet away.
Like they would just pick up a stick off the ground and just throw it?
You had to be the right kind of stick that they knew.
Right. Wow.
And so for that day, I had the privilege. This almost makes me cry. I had the privilege of being close with that kind of knowledge. It was really something. Really something. Anyway, they picked me because I figured out how to catch the trout, I guess. And I knew how to cook them and so on. And I guess that's why that happened. Well, right about that time, I guess it was the next morning, the wind picked up and started blowing toward us. And so now the smoke is coming toward it. It's still way the heck over there, but you can hear it. And then you could see it, you could smell it. That was the first thing that gave me the clue. And you know, I saw the ranger guy with his binoculars watching it, and he was talking on his walkie-talkie thing that was like this big with an antenna on it. We didn't have cell phones back then. This is 1966. 66, I guess. And so there we were, and it was starting to come toward us. And like I say, you could hear the trees exploding. It was just like a boom, and you could see. And I thought, well, they're coming our way now because of the wind. And it was getting kind of closer, and he wasn't saying anything. And I was watching all this, and I'm starting to think, well, heck, I don't know how to fight a forest fire. Sorry about that. Sorry. So the next morning, the wind changed, and my first clue was I could smell fire. So I got up and I looked, and I could see the ranger guy. He had his binoculars. He was standing over away from us, and he was kind of watching the whole thing. And I could see the smoke. I could see it was blowing toward us now. Still long, I don't know, 5 miles away, whatever it was. Maybe more, kind of hard to tell. And I could hear the trees exploding. Boom. I could see the shrapnel, the pieces flying through the air on this big arc and then landing. And I could see that when they landed, sometimes those started burning. And I could see the whole thing was moving gradually toward us. And so I thought, wait a minute, I've never been in a forest fire before. I don't know what to do. I mean, I can figure out how to catch some trout and so on and so forth. This is all very good, but what about when this gets serious? So I walked over and I tapped the guy on the shoulder, the ranger guy on the shoulder, and said, "Sir, don't we?" He said, "Oh, yeah, okay, right. Sorry, I forgot. You guys don't know shit, do you?"
Oh, yeah, I forgot you are
firefighters. So we went to, there was this truck, big army truck, big wheels and so on, and in the back there were shovels, and there were these bags you carry on your back filled with fill them full of water, and you have a hand pump that sprays water, and shovels, and mattocks for digging. So he got us all lined up and showed us how to use the spray packs. There were 5 of those and so on, and the rest of us ended up with shovels and mattocks. I had a shovel, I think, yeah. Said, okay, look, so if one of those things comes our way and we're vectored in on it, we get in the truck. I'll drive us there. You get out of the truck. You see some fire. You hit it with the shovel to knock it out, or you dig up some dirt and throw on it. You guys with the Maddox, you're supposed to dig up dirt. You guys with the shovel, throw on it, and then the sprayers. That was our training. And sure enough, I don't know, maybe 2 hours later, here one came. You could just see it.
Wow.
And it landed maybe a mile over that way. And you could see the smoke. And so he's on his, okay, fine. So we got vectored in, and he got in the truck, and he had all these maps and so on. And he knew what he was doing. He got us to the fire. So the idea was to put these things out, if we could, before they got worse, right? And so when we got to the fire that we'd been sent to deal with, it was in this little meadow, maybe, I don't know, maybe as big as this field here, maybe 50 feet. If we're in the center of it, maybe 50 feet in diameter all around us. It wasn't very big. And there were spruce trees. It was what had been, the way these things formed, it had been a little pond, and it had gradually filled up with silt until, so the trees hadn't grown on in there, though there were little ones coming up. It was kind of marshy, but the reason this fire was burning in the first place was that we were having a very dry period. So anyway, this thing, brand, whatever you call it, had landed roughly in that, and it was on fire. So drove up to it, and there was one of those pump things. What do you call them? Grasshopper pumps.
Grasshopper
like
rig?
That way.
Oh, like an oil.
Yeah,
an oil rig.
yards
Grasshopper rig, yeah.
That's what we were there to do, to keep these things from blowing up.
Oh, to save the oil company.
Yeah.
Not the forest.
So we all jumped out and started digging and, putting out the flames and stomping on them. You're just putting them out. Mostly I started just hitting them with the shovel. And it actually worked. It was just grass, yay. It was burning, so you could kind of do this. It sort of worked. But we were not really being very effective, and we were losing the battle. And I could see that. And I was starting to have ideas about how to scamper away from fire. And on this occasion, at least I wasn't up to here in water, so I could, in fact, scamper if I had to. And I was getting kind of close to that when I realized that they used to use B-24s, and I knew all this military stuff because I grew up in the military, and I knew what a B-24 looked like, big old World War II attack bomber. And I could see that there were a flight of them coming in, and I thought, oh, those are the slurry wagons, that's what we called them. And they'd fly in and drop this red, you've seen them do it, this red stuff that was water and, clay mixed together, and it would just would sort of put a blanket on the flames. It would just knock it out. Anyway, I could see them, 2 or 3 of them coming. I thought, okay, good, I guess. So I was kind of watching. I said, hey, Craig. Craig, meanwhile, stomped. He had one of these pumper things, if I remember correctly, or whatever he was saying. Hey, Craig, aircraft, aircraft. He's not paying any attention at all. And so one of them peeled off and started heading our way. And I thought, well, they're going to come in, and good, because otherwise, who knows if we can get away from all this safely and not end up dying, which is always kind of in your mind if you're paying attention. And there were 25 of us, something like that altogether. And I began to, I'm watching, and I began to know some of the other guys were starting to ease back into the tree line. So I thought, okay, that's the thing to do. So I started, Craig, ease back in the tree line. Craig, no. And here the thing comes. I mean, you've seen the old movies, the old war movies, I guess. And here comes this B-24. We're going into a dive. You could hear it. Because the way it worked was and the doors would open under they'd pull 2 Gs or whatever, and the doors would open, the stuff would just fly out, and it would, if the pilot knew what he was doing, or she, probably a guy, it would hit, the fire. So they had to get going like this and like that.
Wow.
So, I kind of knew that, so I figured that's what they were doing, and Greg's not paying any attention at all. Fortunately, his back was turned, which is part of it. I mean, I guess he would have seen the bomber coming if he'd been looking that way, but his back was turned, and he was trying to do his job. He was busy. So he didn't see it coming, and he didn't pay any attention to me yelling at him. which was no surprise. He never did anyway. So there were 3 or 4 or 5 of them still out there, and the rest of us were easing back when this thing hit. Wham! Well, it's mud. It's mostly water, mud. I don't know. Think of a pie smacking. You know, so it's not real heavy, but it's enough if you're not expecting it to knock you down. So it did. Right on their faces, my brother right in the middle of them, down. And I wish I had photos of this, because when he stood up, he was now two-tone. He was red on the back and normal. And he turned and looked at me and said, "Why the fuck didn't you tell me something?" So.
Well, what'd you say?
Whatever.
Whatever, man. Whatever.
I did, you weren't listening. I don't remember.
Yeah.
And that's
so he
more
was
or less
pretty
the end
pissed
of that
off.
story.
What's-
Anyway, they put the fire out. We got back in the truck. We went back to the campsite. And there we sat for the next 5 days because it didn't happen again.
No.
The wind shifted, and that was the only one.
Well, I told that story to Cornell William Brooks when he was president of the NAACP, and the other people we were marching with. In fact, I'm pretty sure Jamal was with us. We were on a sprint, we were marching at 4.5 miles per hour. And this was on the America's Journey for Justice, the one from Selma to DC, the Middle Passage. I met on, and he died on. And I'll never forget, because that story it's a great story, but it's like, well, what's the end of the story? And Cornell's a pretty good storyteller, and he goes, well, what's the end of the story? I was like, well, that's the end of the story. He's like, no, the end of the story is, needless to say, this did not help familial relations. Y'all don't know this, but my dad does not get along with his brother.
Yeah, it was not, the familial relations weren't there at that point anyway.
That is the story of the Alaska fire and forest fire, and I suppose it should also be of learning to hunt with the indigenous people.
More learning to show or
proving
thank
your
goodness
worth.
I had the sense to show respect and to have some skill and some interest, and they liked that, and it makes sense. And as I say, it was the real great part of this whole thing was the opportunity to be included like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that was I don't have words for that. That was special.
An honor.
Yeah, it was an honor. Yeah.
Well, and I've never written a poem about that one, which I don't know how I would do it, but this is there I was, I guess this would be episode 6. We're doing these a little bit out of order, and maybe one
I thought we were
day.
in episode 42 or something.
Well, we'll get there.
Episode 6,
Maybe one day I'll write a poem about it, but I think I'll just leave it at that.